joining us again for another Self-Storage Unlocked session that we are doing here called Engaging with the Experts. And my guest today is RK Kliebenstein. I'm saying that right, RK?
You got it.
Awesome. And I asked RK to join us today because RK has over 35 years of self-storage industry experience. So RK, let's get started with kind of walking me through your experience in the space and what made you land in self-storage. I want to preface this by saying a lot of people recently I've heard say, and I would echo this for my own self-storage found them. They didn't find self-storage. Is that your story or is it a little different than that?
No, that's exactly what happened to me. I was working for a group of investors in New Mexico, where I was born, and they had to solve a problem, and self-storage ended up being the solution to that problem.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So did you have to get like fast-tracked into learning this industry? What helped you get engaged with the industry and learn what you needed to learn?
I did. I was actually managing a portfolio of multifamily garden style offices in this big industrial park. And we were having trouble deciding what to do with the industrial park in a second phase. And the owner of the business went to Arizona and saw self-storage for the first time, came back and said, "That's what we're going to do. Go figure it out."
Oh, well, that was kind of them, right?
So I got a quick education in self-storage, but interestingly enough, from that point, really, I never looked back. I did a couple of odd things on the side, but I've always just had a huge passion for self-storage and for the people in self-storage.
And I've seen you speak live at events, and your passion just kind of shines off of you when you're presenting. You're such a great presenter and you always present such great information for us. So it's another reason why I wanted to bring you here today. So not only 35 years in the space, you have a company called Coast to Coast Realty Advisors. Tell me what you guys do. I know a lot of feasibility studies, but how do you help the self-storage industry and owners and operators out there?
So I have a lot of entry points where I help folks. I have a client up in the New Jersey, New York market that I find sites for. I'm like their contract acquisition guy, if you will. Cool. I have clients that I do underwriting for on a contract basis. I also do some asset management where I make sure that the portfolios are performing properly and do the monthly interfaces with the third-party management company just to make sure that things are going the way that they're supposed to. I'm involved in helping folks raise capital to either get into the business or grow their self-storage business. And it's interesting that I have a pretty wide background. About the only thing I don't do is I don't do any third-party management. I just have never geared myself up to do that, although I have operational experience and expertise. I feel like there's a lot of folks in that space that can do it at a scale better than I can.
That's fair to say. So 35 years is a long time in any particular industry. So you've probably seen just about everything at this point, from the highs and lows. I know that you had told me in 2006, your organization did over 2,500 feasibility studies because the industry was so busy at that time. Take me back to the beginning of your career. What were some of like the biggest challenges as you were learning this space that you came across, or things that maybe shocked you that you wouldn't have expected?
So, back in the early days of self-storage, it was really a different industry. For those of you who are old enough to remember this, and this is going to date myself as to how old I am, but we used to run self-storage properties on what we called Trash 80s, which was the old Tandy TRS 80 precursor to Nintendo. And that's how we ran our gate systems. And basically, all we could do is we had this very simple program that told the gate to open or close, and you could tell it your tenant was or wasn't paid. But that was the rudiment of self-storage. I mean, it was pretty crude back then. Our locational drivers were so much different than they are today. I mean, we were in the back of industrial parks. We were in these really odd duck locations that nobody would really ever think about. And our business was really considered a land banking business. In other words, you built self-storage there because someday you were probably going to build something else. But the robustness of the industry, the acceptance of the product, all the stars came into alignment. And self-storage has just continued to grow and to evolve into what it is today, which is a phenomenal investment vehicle, a technology embraced industry that was very slow to find technology, but now very fast to embrace it, and a very fluid industry. I just love seeing all the new faces in self-storage that bring so many different things to the table and help us to grow our business in ways that I don't even know that we imagine today, that they just bring in new ideas, and it's really refreshing. So it's been a very big privilege to have served the industry and to have grown with it and to grown alongside of it, particularly in the technology side. I'm a bit of a data nerd, and I work with a couple of data companies, and that's going to eventually change, I think, the next iteration of self-storage. I spend about 20% of my time trying to replace myself with technology. I really think that we're going to get to artificial intelligence at some point, and my job will not be very necessary anymore, because guys like me, we won't need to be around. We'll be able to use very sophisticated tools to do site selection and qualification of sites.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a huge shift in technology. Years ago, you would have never thought of having an unmanned property, probably, right? You would have always had at least a facility manager there on site greeting customers. And now we can totally do that without a human body being there through the kiosk services and some of the different online services that are offered out there from a technology standpoint. So
I designed my first kiosk in 1996.
do you want to know how old I was in 1996? I'm just kidding.
I do not want to know. No.
I was still in high school. I'm just kidding with you. So you've seen a lot, and the cool thing, I don't want to say this is a cool thing, I would say, but a fortunate thing for our industry is, COVID hit and we kept propelling through all of the many challenges that were out there with COVID, and our industry sustained through COVID. What would you tell a new owner? So I would say, let me backtrack that a little bit and say, because of that, I think there's like a laser focus on this asset, this sector, this asset class right now, because people are seeing that it survived, the pandemic. What are some give me top three tips you would give a true new owner, operator, investor that's coming into this space to kind of help propel their advancement in career in this space?
So the first thing is I would say that I don't know that these are normal times. I think these are very unique times. A lot of it having been driven by the pandemic, which is actually an endemic technically, I think, at the end of the day. I kind of believe it'll run its way all the way through the population, and then we'll finally get to where we want to go with it. But from an economic standpoint, it's been a tremendous boost to self-storage. And we're kind of like a cat, because we've had at least 9 lives at this point, because we've been through 9 or more major events in our industry. And each time we go through them, I begin to wonder if that's the new norm. And if it is the new norm, how do we adjust to it, and how do we move forward? And then what does the next new norm look like? So I would say the number one thing is don't think that super high occupancies, really aggressive rental rates like we're seeing right now, fast absorption of product, and a huge embracement by the general public as to self-storage is what I would call normal times. I think these are a little bit abnormal. Sure. So adjust for today, but underwrite and think of your projects in different kinds of times. And it's not difficult to do. The second thing I would say is be really, really cautious today about getting into the business. Do your homework, which is really the conducting of due diligence. Understand your markets, understand your site, and then understand the dynamics of self-storage in your specific location. Because one of the things is, given the internet is huge, and I know we can draw from all over the world now, where we used to have a yellow page ad, and if they didn't have that book, they couldn't find us. And I know that we're almost ubiquitous now across the platform. But self-storage is still location, 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 and it's still very heavily dependent on what we call our primary market, which in most of the United States, unless you're in Manhattan, is like a 1 mile radius. And then we kind of reach out to maybe the 3 mile radius. And that's our oikos, that's our world, if you will. So be very focused on that 1 mile radius, understand who your customers or potential customers are, understand really well who the competitors are and how you outpace them, what you do better than they do, what maybe they don't do as well as you do, and then focus on that and use that as your driver to really figure out your market and then meet the needs of that marketplace. So first is, these may not be quote unquote normal times. Second, be really diligent about your business and understanding self-storage. And then the third is, have a vision for what you want to do. Know where you want to go, and then find a pathway to execute that vision. You know, I think that we too often, we just kind of get into something and we figure it out as we go along. We don't have that end goal out there. When I talk to folks who are thinking about getting in the self-storage business, I usually start with the end in mind and say, well, how does this all end for you? I mean, is this a legacy you're going to pass on to your estate? Your heirs are going to have this forever and ever? Or is this something you're planning on, you're just trying to capitalize on this very robust time, and in a year you want to be out, or 3 years you want to be out? So have a vision, have a plan on how to get there, and then execute that plan and devote resources to doing it. I mean, that's the big thing is, you know, I watch Shark Tank all the time. I'm a huge Shark Tank fan.
I am
and one
too.
of the big, see, there you go.
I love
and one
it.
of the things they ask is, are you fully committed to this, or are you going to quit your day job or whatever? And I say the same thing about self-storage. I don't think it's a part-time job. I think it's something that if you're going to do, give it your all. I mean, go all in and dedicate yourself to it. And that's going to help your execution an awful lot. It's going to put you in a much better position to sustain what we have today and to be able to endure challenges as they come up. Because just like fishing, carp happens. I mean, things are going to go wrong. And the better prepared you are for it, and the more you know where you're going, the easier it'll be for you to get there.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing all of that. I just love how much knowledge you have of the industry. So speaking of that, I've been fortunate enough to see you speak live. I saw you speak at Nashville, the SSA show in Nashville. And I believe your presentation, if I'm remembering correctly, was surrounded around like knowing your market and the attributes of your market, like what you were just talking about. Like, you got to get intimately involved with knowing that market. And you have some facilities, or you have some investments in facilities, and I know that you're developing some. Share with me what you would share with a newer owner operator for those key attributes that you look for when you're entering into a new market to develop.
So as I said, I'm kind of a data nerd, and I love data, and it tells me so many things. And it's been really only over about the last 6 or 7 years in self-storage that we've had really great access to phenomenal tools. I mean, before that, we kind of seat of the pants it and we developed them ourselves, but now we have, you know, big firms out there who are dedicating huge resources. And I would say that we need to take advantage of the information that's available to us, because they're spending a lot of money and a lot of time to gather the data that helps us, whether it be rental rate data, which I think is just hugely important in understanding a market and a store, is being the number one risk in my mind is projecting rents into the future. So the more data you can use to support that, the better off you're going to be. And you can't use point in time data. You can't just go to the internet and look at it today and see what that is. If you go to stores, for example, where there's just been a hurricane in the Southeast, I'm headed to Baton Rouge this week, and it's crazy. I mean, those rates aren't at all what they have been in the past, but that's because there's an event that's caused it. Right. So if I did a pro forma based on that today, my data would be greatly skewed. It would not be accurate. So you have to dig deep into the data. You need a historical background to get there. Second part of it is your demographics. The data is out there for all kinds of different attributes for the demography of your particular location and your market. Understand it, know it, use that as a guideline when you look at your location versus other locations. One of the things that I do that I don't know that anybody else does is I look at my primary competitors and I actually run demographic reports on those primary competitors. And I look for the trends that tell me, the data that tells me why they might be successful or why they might be struggling. And so I'm very focused on understanding how demographics work, how incomes impact my ability to raise rents and generate new rentals. And then the last part of it is the physical part of self-storage, that building, that location, understanding the site, using data that helps you to get through the zoning and entitlement process. Our biggest variable is typically the site itself, whether we have to retain water, whether we have to bring utilities into the site, whether we have traffic issues. All of those things are important parts about the success of your project and containing costs going in. So to me, it's like use the data, build a foundation from that data, and then also use that same data to execute your strategy.
Awesome. Awesome stuff. I love that you actually pull the demographics on the competitors. You're the first person that I've talked to in a long time that I've heard say that. So that's refreshing to hear that you've got your eyes on them as well, and you need to, because the space is competitive, right? I mean, you pull a 1 mile, 3 mile, 5 mile report, and you've got some people in your backyard, literally sometimes across the street, next door. I've seen facilities. I just drove down one of our major highways the other day, and there was a Life and Cube like directly next door to one another. No barrier in between, not like a fast food joint, nothing, literally two. And that's because the market probably demanded at the time that those two facilities were built, right? Especially with those two groups, because they're sophisticated groups, and I know that they're placing themselves appropriately. So awesome stuff there. You talked me through some tools and attributes that you're looking when coming into a new market. Now, let's say I have my facility open. What do you like to have in your toolkit, so to say, to help operate the facility more efficiently? And the toolkit doesn't necessarily have to be technology or software related, although most of it probably will be, but the human element. Walk me through what you think those necessary tools are that you need to be successful at the facility level.
So I think one of the most important attributes of this, or one of the most important things that we need to focus on, is revenue management, because revenue management impacts your ability to get to stabilized occupancy. It impacts your ability to raise rents, to hold on to your existing guest base or tenant base. All those things are very, very dependent upon understanding that. And so I think that understanding the physical plant is really, really important, but how you manage those rents is incredibly important, and having the right tools to do so. I just went through a number of reports that were generated by a third-party management company relative to a site. And I began to go through it, and I know they have business rules. They say we don't raise rents before X number of months. We only raise Y%. I mean, they have these set of rules. Mm-hmm. But when I actually went to the individual tenants and I looked at the rent roll and then their individual ledger cards to see how long they had been there, how many rent increases they've had in the past, what their payment history looked like, it was very clear and evident to me that no one was really watching the details. And the devil is truly in the details. Oh, they have programs, they have business rules, but they didn't do a deep enough dig to get into it. And I found a lot of opportunities that were missed because someone wasn't looking at the individual tenant and the individual unit that's there. So being able to spend the time to do a very, very deep dig, because there's not very many people like the REITs who can spend millions and millions and tens of millions of dollars on technology to develop a revenue management program. Sure. If you're an independent owner operator and you're not managed by one of those, then you need to be able to use whatever tools you can. And the supplant for those tools is often just digging into the details, because you can't develop a computer application, an API that's going to do all that automatically for you. Sure. So I'm very, very focused on getting into the individual tenant ledgers and individual records for that space and figuring that part of it out. I think that's just incredibly important as we try and get a hold of our business and the management of that business.
Yeah, I would agree. And we talk with so many groups that, are doing stuff still with all this great technology out there in a manual way where they can automate it. And I mean, the man hours and labor hours that they save by automating, you may take an initial hit in the beginning, bringing the automation in, but in the long run, if you can be forward thinking enough, it's going to save you a whole lot of time and money on the back end for sure. Now with
And it allows
oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm
it allows
sorry.
you to get to scale too. I mean, that's really the important part is it's, you can do it for just one store and you might be able to pull that off for two. But if your goal is to get to 10 stores, you simply won't have enough time to do that. You're going to need to figure out how you use tools to get there.
Yeah, for sure. And I would agree with that. And we see that, like I said, in so many cases when we talk with owner operators through their journey of kind of where they are and what their pain points are, and try to help them kind of mitigate through a lot of that. So with competition being pretty steep in this industry and a lot of people, like I said, within that 1, 3, 5 mile radius in some scenarios, not all, what would be your suggestion to an owner operator to help make their location differentiate itself from the competitors around them?
Well, one thing I would suggest you do is that you understand your competitors. I love the internet. It's been a huge benefit to everybody. But there's just something for going and kicking the dirt that makes a huge difference in life. And maybe it's just because I'm old school, and I mean really old school. But I still, when I go into a market, I've done my internet research, but I want to go look at that market. I want to look at that site and I want to visit each competitor. As an operator, you still need to understand what's happening with your competitors. I think you should be driving those competitors at least on a monthly basis to see what's happening in that market, whether the street's being torn up, whether there's a new retailer that's being constructed next door. But you just need to see it and physically put your eyes on it and understand the attributes of it. Look at the sign. I love to go by stores at night because it amazes me how many people don't watch that their lights go out. I mean, this is the most simple thing in the world. But if you don't show up at 9 o'clock at night, you might not know that the lights aren't even on.
That's
and
true.
So it's very true. And it's a part of my due diligence routine that shocks everybody is the scope of work says that the firm that's doing the property condition report has to go back at dark and check to make sure that all the lights work in the driveways and that the sign is well illuminated, because that's a miss. But those are things you don't know from the internet. You can't tell that from a Google Earth visit. But you can tell it when you put boots on the ground and you physically go understand, you know what, the traffic is really, really bad in front of brand X. I mean, it's hard to get into it. If you have a U-Haul, it's going to be hard to get in. And then use that as an advantage. Now, I'm not saying that you say something bad about your competitor. I say you say something great about your store. Oh, and by the way, did you see there's a left turn lane right in front of our business? You'll find that at 5 o'clock at night, when others are really, really busy and it's hard to get into a store, you're going to be able to turn right into our driveway in that turn lane. And you'll see how big the turning radius is and how easy it is to get into our driveway. Now that says a lot. It says a lot about, maybe compare that to brand X. So it's understanding the good and the bad of theirs, and then using and focusing on the strong points of your own store and driving rents and driving business as a result of it. Use pop-ups on your website. I mean, if you have something that's going on, we're next to the new McDonald's. I mean, that's something that's new. So maybe that's going to catch someone else's eye. And so maybe put it on a pop-up for 90 days on your website, or just, things that help people to identify with who you are and what you are. I think those are the kind of things we can do as operators to differentiate ourselves from our competitors, because quite frankly, and I hate to say this, a lot of our competitors are just lazy. They're so complacent because the business is so phenomenally good that you don't have to work that hard. And my position is, it's kind of like the Warren Buffett thing. When everybody else is sleeping, I'm driving the hardest. That's when I'm going to really, really work to set myself apart from everybody else. And so to me, a lot of it's just understand your competitors, visit them, know their weaknesses, capitalize on your own strengths, and play to your own strengths.
So you're doing, I would imagine you do a SWOT analysis as you're going through all of this, right? Is that part of like how you kind of map everything out? You're looking at everything, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, all of that. Very
Yeah, I'm a
cool.
big user of SWOT analysis. I love using SWOT forms to
Me too.
communicate in a succinct way to folks what their site looks like. It's funny you mentioned that. I'm just working on a SWOT diagram now for a store.
Yeah, I'm an analytics person too. I love data, just like you, and I always love what I uncover in SWOT analysis. They're always so fun to do, and I always learn from you. I would have never thought to drive the market at night. And I want to bring up another key point. Not only do you want your sign illuminated so they can see you, but think of this: people love to break into self-storage facilities if they're a perpetrator, right? So if your aisleway lights are out or your motion detector lights are out, I mean, think that's an opportunity for, a theft, burglary to happen. So that's another good reason to go see if all of the lights are working on the property as well. So I love that you shared that with us. That's awesome stuff.
And Jessica, something you can
Yeah.
do that's very easy is you can go to the internet or to one of the DIY stores and
Mhm.
buy yourself some LED solar lights. They have these really powerful solar lights that you can literally just clip onto the eave of your building or onto your gutters
Mhm.
and take those lights and shine them down on either your facade or your doors so that people drive by, they see them. They're like $30 a piece. I mean, they cost you absolutely nothing. And
Sure.
they're just a really easy way to illuminate your positive points about your site.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've mentioned several times throughout this conversation, we know that this is the biggest driver of having a facility, right? Renting the units, rent units. But there's ancillary income that can be made if people decide to sell retail boxes, packing supplies within their office space. Tenant insurance is another arm to use for a profit center. How much emphasis are your facilities, or when you're consulting with people, do you put around that ancillary income line?
It used to be that ancillary income was 5 to 6% of our business, and that's because it was largely late fees and admin fees. I mean, that's what. And then, we sold maybe a little bit of tenant protection in the early days, and we got like maybe $1 from Brand X that paid us for writing a policy, but it
Sure.
wasn't a substantive part of our bottom line. Today, ancillary income can easily, especially if you're getting all of the revenue from it, like you have an SBOA insurance deal and you're working where you're getting the lion's share of that revenue, then that can mean that component may be as much as 10% of your bottom of your top line. I mean, it is a huge revenue generator. And I work with clients to find unique ways to generate ancillary income or to use ancillary products and services to rent space. So one quick example I want to give you, because this is really, really a unique situation. I had a store up in the Northeast, and when they did the original unit mix, they built way too many 5x10s. I mean, it was just a rondonkulous number of 5x10s in this store. And they weren't able to convert them very easily because a lot of them were up against a concrete wall that demised 2 of them. So they weren't able to easily remove the demising wall to create a 10x10 with it. So I
Sure.
said, okay, what do we need to do to drive business into those 5x10s? So I went out on the internet and I found these cedar planks, and we cedar lined a 5x10 and put rails in it for clothing storage. And I'll be
Interesting.
doggone if that wasn't a major home run. Now, folks were using it as storage for their clothing, and they would literally swap out their winter wardrobe from their summer wardrobe. Because it was in this cedar line, it smelled fantastic. It helped to prevent any other additional pests that might infiltrate. I mean, there's just so many advantages of it. But I got to tell you, the number one thing that just made me just goo over it was the first time I saw a young lady open that door, take a deep breath, and look at that cedar plank. And I watched her eyes just light up. And it was like, okay, we've connected with our tenant right then and there. And
Sure.
you know what? She went out and found like 11 other of her friends who now rent spaces. And they go have these little parties where they go swap their clothes out, and They have a really, really good time. So she said, what do you got for my shoes? So now we build a shoe rack on the back wall on the 5-foot wide space. The 10-foot long runs have double rails on them. And it's just the coolest thing. Now, here's the great part. We also sell what they call space bags. You know, those bags where you put the vacuum in it and you suck it down?
Yeah.
So we put a couple of shelves below the shoe racks, and we sell the space bag, and we have a vacuum in the office. And they buy them right there. They put their stuff inside of it. They suck the air out of it. It condenses it down. Away it goes in storage.
Man,
but it was finding a creative way to move that space, that inventory that was there, and make a guest really happy. I mean, if you just saw the first time she looked at that, it was like the light bulb went off, and it was, I need this, and my buddies need it too.
I love that. I mean, talk about utilizing your space, right? Condensing down your clothes through a vacuum sealed bag. Like, that's a great tool that you could give at the store level to a tenant coming in that says, you know, hey, what are you guys storing with us? Oh, 10,000 clothing articles, you know, but for us ladies out there that like to have that many, that's an awesome utilization of really condensing it and getting the best bang for their space. It was either on LinkedIn.
By the way, we're selling plastic shoe boxes there too.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Transparent shoe boxes where they can put their high heels in there. They can see through it, so they know right away where the red ones are and the black ones are and the brown ones are. And it was easy.
Now, I would drive 30 miles for a facility like that. In most cases, that's not happening, right? It's just not happening. But to store my precious accessories and shoe collection, I would probably drive to get to a facility like that. I want to say it was like LinkedIn, or it was one of these channels I saw it on, where it was actually, it's a funny story. It's two drag queens. They have massive costumes, right? And they're literally renting a facility, a unit within a facility. And they go in there, they video record within as they're like getting themselves ready to go out for the night. And it's just hilarious to see, you know, what people store and what they utilize those spaces for. I really,
so one of the things I like to do is name my hallways. And I think for that group right there, I'd have the RuPaul highway.
You better work as you're coming down that hallway, right? Like, you could play that music in the background for the tenants as they come in every day.
We'll put some red carpet down on that hallway, and we'll put a backdrop where they can take pictures of themselves with our logo on the back of it. I got this, Jessica.
Yeah, you do. I mean, I think we've got a new program coming to the self-storage industry here soon by RK and Jessica. I love it. I've got a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. So there's a lot of chatter around this. I see a lot of different viewpoints around this particular topic. So we all know COVID hit, and it hit hard in a lot of situations. And I used to be in franchising, and some of my locations were within malls, and malls have been a dying thing for a long time now, right? Big box retailers pull out of malls. You see them converted into call centers. I've seen some be churches, some be police stations. I mean, just to rent the space, right? And now there's been a little bit of a surge of people trying to convert those spaces into self-storage. I've heard of old grocery stores being converted, old Kmart's, etc. Tell me your viewpoint on that. Do you think that that's a wise decision? I mean, I know it's dependent on the asset, right? But tell me how you feel about big box retailers now converting into self-storage spaces.
So first of all, I'm a risk guy. You know, that's really my job, is understanding risk, mitigating it, and then understanding the rewards that are commensurate with risk.
Sure.
So I love conversion. I think conversions are great, especially if you can do single story conversions like a Wally World or a Target or something like that, where you've got an 86,000 in the first generation or 122,000 in the second generation or first generation of Walmart superstores. You know, that's a big enough box that you can convert that to storage. You can be renting literally in 90 days or less from the time you have your steel on site. They're super easy conversions. They're typically in retail locations. Given the fact that they're retail, they're right where we want to be, so they make it a lot easier. The risk side of this is, first of all, understanding what the municipality sees in that box. Because if they still see that in their minds as being a great employment generator, which of course, you know, self-storage is not. So if they see it as a great employment generator, they may not be willing to give you the zoning to do self-storage, because typically
For sure.
self-storage is still back in a general commercial and industrial, some kind of zoning that is not the same as a retail. So they might still see that as someday there's going to be a DIY store. There's something else is going to replace it that's going to generate a lot of jobs. So understand your municipality and their willingness. I like to say, until it's got some graffiti on the building, some weeds in the parking lot, and a couple of broken windows, the city doesn't really think about self-storage. Once that happens, they think, okay, it's really not going to retail. Let's find an alternative use.
For sure.
So understand that. The second part of it is it's very complex to use retail centers that have REAs, or reciprocal easement agreements, where you have traffic from and parking from other stores, because we don't really do well, and it's very hard to get self-storage to pay for common area maintenance and pass-throughs, because we need to control our own destiny. And when you're in a mall, for example, like let's say you're going to take an old retailer and you're going to convert that retail space, and it's 150,000 square feet, and it used to be the anchor for the mall. Well, guess what? The other big stores in the mall may have clauses in their lease that dictate who can go into that space, because it requires that they draw traffic, and your self-storage may not fit in there. It may take you years to get permission from brand X to allow self-storage in that location. So you got to understand that there's a legal challenge to this. The second part of it is this whole thing about common area maintenance, because they're going to repave the parking lot. Well, guess what? We're a big user. We probably took a box that had 300 parking spots and 180,000 square feet. Well, guess what? We're paying our share based on the square footage and the amount of parking that we have in there. So it's probably not going to work. So you really got to understand, if they're going to pass through those expenses to you, how that's going to impact you financially going forward. There may be merchant association fees. We don't amortize those fees very well because we don't need them. We don't need to participate in their spring fling or their Christmas advertising and pay for Santa Claus. Those are all great things if you're the jewelry store, but they don't really help self-storage. And we're on an end cap anyway, likely. So you really got to be careful about the financial aspect of it and understand the zoning and the municipal. If you can get through those things, I'm going to bet that the location is probably aces, because I love really high line retail locations. One quick thing, we know that in our industry, females make most of the storage decisions. Now, that doesn't mean they use it. It just means that they make the decision. And in my house, I know who makes the decisions in my house. I wear the pants in my family. And as long as I wear the one she lays out, I'm in really good shape, right? So no, having been said that, the female who makes that decision, we go to what I developed maybe 8 years ago called the Soccer Mom Index. And the Soccer Mom Index says, my location is going to be where the soccer moms are. And so I figured out, where do they shop? What do they buy? What kind of stores do they frequent? And then what's my proximity to those stores? And how am I getting them to drive past my front driveway? So by being able to understand who your target customer is, and are you in their path of travel, or can you be in their path of travel? And then understanding the quality of it. So for example, car dealers are in my analysis. Well, guess what? A Maserati dealer gets more points than a Kia dealer gets. All right. Even Target gets a slight edge over Wally World. Dollar stores don't get nearly as much play as other kinds of retailers. So by understanding who they are, who shops there, it drives the rents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would agree with that. I mean, there's just so much data. And I'll round this interview. Again, I always love the information you share. So I'll round out the last question with, and I know what your answer is already, but I'm going to let you answer on your own behalf, and I'm not going to speak for you. Revenue management, talk me through that. How important do you feel revenue management is in this space?
I don't know that there's a lot that's more important than revenue management. I mean, it is just, we talked about it briefly before. It is so key to what we're doing, and it's very sophisticated. I mean, if you think of the depth of the algorithms that go into an Extra Space or a CubeSmart or any one of the big brands that develop these really, really complex formulas to drive rents and decide when they're going to make rent increases, how much they're going to be, who's going to get those rent increases, all of those things, measure that against the competition. Then you have to measure that against your traffic to your website, your closing ratios, your call center. It's a huge, huge deal to be able to pull all of that information together. But at the end of the day, it helps us get our stores full, even if it means we have to do some discounting to get there, put the butts in the seats, and then make them pay for the seats. That's kind of the way it works these days. So understanding what the tipping and inflection points are for that guest to make that decision whether they're going to rent with you or they're going to rent with brand X, and then knowing how to optimize on that once you've got them in your store and they're a happy guest. How do I keep them there? And more importantly, how do I optimize and how do I use the tools I have to drive the best rents possible? And that's what revenue management does for us. It finds us guests, it puts the guests in the space, it keeps them in the space, and then it helps them to pay.
I couldn't agree more. Well, again, RK, thank you so much for spending some time with us today and sharing your deep, deep knowledge in the space. If anyone wants to get in touch with RK to learn about his services and his company, your email is pretty simple. It's Ask RK, right? I'll let you.
Yeah, it's RK at AskRK.com.
There it is. I knew it was something simple. RK at AskRK.com. Trust me, he will answer, and he loves this industry and is so willing to help. Again, RK, thanks for joining us today, and always thank you for being a great partner of the Storage Business Owners Alliance. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys, and much success in your journey in self-storage. It's a fantastic business, and I wish you absolutely, if it's for you, go for it.
Awesome. Thanks, RK.